We're going to get started. It's about that time. Thank you all for coming this evening. It's so good to see you all. Just a couple words from the History Center. My name's Nicole Smith. I work here. We have some great programs coming up. I also want to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the York County History Center YouTube channel. But this coming Sunday is our Oyster Festival. It's our biggest event and fundraiser for the year. If you've never been, it's a wonderful outdoor event with food and entertainment, all kinds of different food, not just oysters, and entertainment. So we hope you can come to that. In November, we have some exciting things coming up. We have a speaker, Jeffrey Rosen, who is actually from the National Constitution Center. He's going to be another fundraiser for us. He's going to be speaking at the Appel Center for the History Center. That's on November 14th. And then on November 15th is our Articles of Confederation Day, which is an annual event. But this is going to be very nice this year. We're going to have reenactors, hands-on activities, food, some food, I believe, and this is at our Colonial Courthouse. So thank you very much. Please visit our website, yorkhistorycenter.org. I also have a sign-up sheet over there for our email list, which is a great way to keep track of our upcoming events. So thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Scott Rosenau, one of the assistant directors of the Roundtable. I want to welcome everyone here. Also want to recognize that this month marks the 28th anniversary of this Roundtable. I want to thank Kathy Friel for all of her hard work with this organization. And it's also the 18th year that we've been partnering with the History Center, and we want to thank them for all their support during this time as well. As we promised last month, we do have a great program in store for you tonight. Before we bring up tonight's speaker, we're just going to take a quick look at what we have in store for next month as we wrap up the 2025 campaign. Next month, we're going to welcome Joe Mikowski as he presents War is Politics by Other Means. He states that the real war took place not on the battlefields, but in the capitals of Richmond and Washington. Lincoln's cabinet, friends and enemies, more than mere rivals, several cabinet members of Lincoln's cabinet sought to undermine the president. Yet Lincoln, like the political boss he was, stayed above the fray. We'll discuss the men in Lincoln's government, what they brought to the winning of the war. There will be many surprises. Joe is a retired federal executive, licensed battlefield guide for the Gettysburg National Military Park, the past president of both the Association of Licensed Battlefield Guides and the Gettysburg Civil War Roundtable. He's also on the faculty of the prestigious Lincoln Leadership Institute and has 4 books to his credit, including Lincoln and His Cabinet. Tonight, as we mentioned last month, we are welcoming Kevin Donovan. He's a retired lawyer, originally from Delaware County, Pennsylvania, former head of the New Jersey Employment Labor Law practice of a national firm. He graduated with a BA in history from St. Joseph's in Philadelphia, has a JD from the University of Virginia Law School. And since he, as he's put it, assumed the status of a recovering lawyer, he's focused on his passion for the Civil War with an eye to topics reflecting the intersection of the war and the law. And he's a contributing member of Emerging Civil War and vice president of the Roanoke Civil War Roundtable, an associate editor of North and South Magazine, which he has some articles up here for those who are interested in some of the things he's written about. So tonight we're going to hear from Kevin, and we're going to find out whether the court-martial of Fitz John Porter was fair or fixed. Kevin?
Thank you very much for inviting me and for the hospitality. I love your peppermint patties. They're not going to be there much longer. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So, Fitz John Porter. Even most Civil War buffs know very little about Fitz John. primarily because he exited the stage of the Civil War early on. But it's unfortunate because Fitz John Porter played a very important role in some of the key events in the early stages of the Civil War. In fact, he has been referred to as the Forrest Gump of 1861 by my friend Kevin Pollak. If you remember the movie Forrest Gump, Forrest seemed to show up everywhere, including at important historic events or social movements. He seemed to be everywhere. And so too with our friend Fitz John. You just take a look at that short bio, and he was at some very important points, and he made personally some very important decisions that affected events at the start of the war. But for our purposes, what we need to know is that by the summer of 1862, Porter had emerged as one of the Union's top combat commanders. He was just pointing at this. He was the commander of the 5th Corps of the Army of the Potomac under George McClellan during McClellan's Peninsula Campaign. And in that role, he actually beat Bobby Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia at the Battle of Mechanicsville, also known as Beaver Dam Creek, at the start of the 7 Days Campaign. The very next day, he held out at Gaines Mill virtually all day against very heavy odds. And Gaines Mill, a lot of people don't know it, Gaines Mill was the site of the largest charge ever undertaken by the Army of Northern Virginia. Some estimates have the charge at the end of the day as many as 30 or 35,000 men. Now, Pickett's charge looked like a skirmish line. But that's what it took to move Porter and his men off the line. But the apex of Porter's military career came on July 1, 1862 at Malvern Hill. At Malvern Hill, some say that Porter was effectively in command of the Army of the Potomac because, oddly enough, George McClellan set out the battle on a gunboat in the James River, for which he received a lot of criticism and some derision. That is a lithograph from the '64 presidential campaign referring to McClellan as the gunboat candidate. And that goes back to him being on a gunboat during the Battle of Malvern Hill. And at Malvern Hill, a stinging defeat was inflicted on Lee's army. That's the battle of which Confederate Hill later was to say it was not war, it was murder. Porter won unstinted praise from McClellan. In one dispatch to the War Department urging Porter's promotion, McClellan ended with, "Would that the Army had more general officers like Fitz John Porter." Porter's star at this point in the war is on the rise. Who knows where he might have ended up in the in the pantheon of U.S. military heroes had his star continued on that trajectory. However, spoiler alert, it didn't. 5 months to the day after Porter's great victory at Malvern Hill, he found himself in the dock of a court-martial. His career, and indeed his life, at risk. Porter was charged with disobedience of orders and misconduct in the face of the enemy for his actions at the Battle of Second Manassas. That's Second Bull Run to us Yankees. He was found guilty, and he was sentenced to be cashiered from the Army, plus he was to be precluded from holding any office of trust or profit under the United States. Porter was going from a top Army Major General to a man who couldn't get a job in the local post office. Porter's last hope for a reprieve was crushed by Abraham Lincoln, who signed the order upholding the findings of the court-martial. For the next 16 years, Porter begged for a new hearing, trying to clear his name. Finally, in 1879, a 3-officer board known as the Schofield Board of the Schofield Commission took a fresh look at the case, heard new evidence, and issued a report exonerating him. Still, it took another 7 years before an act of Congress finally reinstated Porter to the Army with the retroactive rank of colonel. Porter then officially retired. During that 23-year period, and really for the rest of his life, Porter had to endure attacks on his reputation and his character. He was frequently called a traitor to his country. For example, in the 1880s, John Pope, who had been Porter's commanding officer at 2nd Manassas, penned an article for Century Magazine's famous Battles and Leaders series. And in the article, Pope went after Porter again. He threw the name Benedict Arnold around him, again implying that Porter was a traitor. And Pope buttressed his arguments against Porter by reminding his audience that Porter had been convicted by court-martial. Well, wait, Porter's defenders said he was exonerated by the Schofield Commission. The problem was the Schofield Board, Schofield Commission, not only had the benefit of hindsight, it had the benefit of testimony from the Confederate side of the battle. James Longstreet, for example, testified before the Schofield Board as to when his forces had arrived on the battlefield of 2nd Manassas, how many men he brought with him, where they were positioned in relation to Porter. Testimony that went a long way toward proving that Porter's failure to attack, pursuant to his orders at the time, was in fact the right move. But that does not mean that the members of the court-martial were wrong in the decision they reached with respect to Porter. Obviously, they could not wait around for the Confederates to testify in the middle of the war. No, they proceeded to judge Porter based upon the evidence at hand. Or did they? Porter always claimed that he was the victim of a political hatchet job. Porter was a protege and a friend of McClellan. They attended West Point together for, I think, a couple of years. But Porter was definitely a protege of McClellan. And as you probably know, in the summer of '62, McClellan is in very bad odor with the radical Republicans. They're the ones who want to convert the war into a crusade to emancipate the slaves. They are also pressuring Lincoln to adopt a so-called hard war policy. Don't just go after the rebel armies, punish, bring the hard hand of war on disloyal civilians. Both McClellan and Porter were well-known opponents of both policies. By contrast, Pope was seen as supportive of both policies, particularly hard war. So let's introduce ourselves to Mr. Pope. So, oh, sorry, wrong Pope, not even the current. There he is. Pope was something of a radical, and a darling of the radicals, I have to say. Particularly, as I said, in the support of the new hard war policy. That's a contemporary cartoon, again, showing that Pope was seen as someone who was going to support a hard war policy. Now, I had said that Porter reported as head of the 5th Corps to McClellan. So how in the world did Porter run afoul of Pope? It happened this way. In June of '62, Pope, who has had some success in the Western theater, is called east and placed in command of a newly created army, the Army of Virginia. Pope's mission is to drive south, capture or threaten Gordonsville, Virginia, severing Lee's links to the resource-rich Shenandoah Valley. The idea is Lee will be forced to divert troops from the Richmond front. making McClellan's job of capturing the rebel capital that much easier. But before Pope can get moving, Lee launches his 7 Days Offensive, and McClellan is knocked back from the gates of Richmond. That's a consequence. For the month of July, after Malvern Hill, and into August, all that time, there's a stalemate in the East. Pope doesn't have enough men to drive south, and in any event, the strategic situation has completely changed. Lee is watching Pope's force warily, but he doesn't dare leave Richmond when McClellan, although he's been knocked back, he's still in the area, threatening Richmond. McClellan, for his part, refuses to resume his offensive unless he's heavily reinforced, which is not going to happen. Stalemate. The Lincoln administration breaks the stalemate. In August, McClellan is ordered, abandon your campaign. Bring your army back north and start sending reinforcements to Pope. McClellan does not like these orders at all because, among other reasons, he sees Pope now as a rival and a threat to his continued command of the army. But the order is reiterated. McClellan starts moving slowly. And as fate would have it, the first unit to reinforce Pope is Fitz John Porter's 5th Corps. Another AOP corps would join later. But that's how Porter ends up under Pope's command. Now, Lee, he figures out what's going on, and he moves his army north to confront Pope. Lee's goal is obvious: destroy Pope's army before it can be fully reinforced by the Army of the Potomac. To get at Pope, who's hunkered down behind the Rappahannock River, Lee devises a bold plan. He sends Stonewall Jackson's wing of his army, about 25,000 men, down the valley through Thoroughfare Gap to get in Pope's rear. On August 27, 28, Jackson succeeds in spectacular fashion after marching, I believe it was 56 miles. Jackson falls on Pope's umbilical cord to Washington, the Orange and Alexander Railroad, and cuts it, burning a key bridge. Then he moves to Manassas Junction, where Pope has his supply base, his supply depot, and destroys it. Pope's got a problem. He's got Jackson in his rear, he's lost his communications with Washington, and he's lost his supply depot. But Pope sees an opportunity in his crisis. As I said, Jackson has just marched 56 miles. He is isolated from the rest of Lee's army for the moment, the rest of the army being Longstreet's way. Pope concludes, not unrealistically, that if he moves fast enough, he should be able to attack Stonewall Jackson and overwhelm Jackson before Longstreet has a chance to reinforce him. And for the last several days in August, that's what Pope tries to do. And on August 29, Pope attacks Jackson. On August 30, he attacks him again. But on the afternoon of August 30, James Longstreet, who by this time has arrived on the field, when he first arrived becomes a matter of controversy at the trial. But on the afternoon of August 30, he certainly is there because Longstreet launches a devastating flank attack and sweeps Pope's army from the field in a rout. As a result, Pope is removed from command and his troops are now turned over to McClellan. Pope is humiliated. Pope is angry. And Pope goes looking for scapegoats to explain his humiliating defeat. And scapegoat number one becomes Fitz John Porter. So what we're going to talk about, was the court-martial fair or was it a Starkett chamber? Now, before we talk about what the court-martial did, let's take a quick look at the members of the court-martial. There were 9 generals on the court. Each of them had one thing in common. Each was handpicked for the role by Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. Now that by itself should raise a red flag for any of you who know that at this point in the war, Stanton has thrown in his lot politically with the radicals, and he hates McClellan. And he hates anyone associated with McClellan, the so-called McClellan clique of the army, and wants to get rid of them. Stanton packs the court with fellow radicals, with Stanton's associates or friends, and with those who you might say perhaps had an incentive to find Porter guilty. David Hunter will preside at the court. Hunter's a radical's radical. He had issued his own Emancipation Proclamation and started arming slaves in April, well before Lincoln was ready for such radical moves. So he's going to preside. Ethan Allen Hitchcock was Stanton's personal military advisor and in Stanton's pocket. Napoleon Bonaparte Buford. I love these Civil War names. He was lobbied by Stanton. Stanton had Buford and Hitchcock to his house for dinner, just as the trial is starting, to let his wishes be known. And Buford also wrote to his more famous half-brother, Cavalry General John Buford, to tell him, I was also lobbied by Secretary of the Treasury, the well-known radical Salmon P. Chase. Benjamin Prentice, he of Hornets Nest of Shiloh fame, was another well-known radical. Future President James Garfield was on the court. Garfield had just been elected to Congress as a Republican. Curiously, Garfield was lobbied before the trial by Irvin McDowell. You probably remember McDowell. He lost First Manassas. But building on the saying that Manassas is certainly the least, or the last place that Irvin McDowell ever would want to build a retirement home, he was at Second Manassas and he lost there too. And he had been harshly criticized by Pope for his performance at Second Manassas. And at this point, he is facing a court of inquiry. So his career's on the line. So McDowell has an incentive to shift blame for the loss at Second Manassas. Silas Casey, another court member, he had a grudge against Porter because Porter had blocked him from an important command on the peninsula. James Ricketts and Rufus King, they also had led troops at Manassas. And their performance also had been criticized by Pope, and they also were facing possible courts of inquiry. As a lawyer, and I'm going to be looking at this as a lawyer, why in the world would you put people who had fought at the battle, had leading roles at the battle on the court that's going to decide essentially, why did you lose the battle? But they were both on the court, and keep Rufus King's name in your mind, and you'll find out why later. John Slow, if my counting is right, John Slow was the last member of the court. He was a longtime friend of Stanton's. Slow was also a last-minute replacement for an officer named William Morris. Morris had served in the old army with Porter and respected him. Morris had raised an objection to the court. He felt it was illegally constituted, and we'll get into that issue in a moment. But as soon as Morris raised his objection, he was booted, and Slow was put in his place. So it looks like a hanging court, but let's not jump to conclusions. Court opens December 1, 5 months to the day after Malvern Hill. Charges are read. Porter's accused of violating a series of orders. To wit, August 29, Porter is ordered by Pope to make a night march. Pope's order is very specific. You will commence your march at 1 in the morning on the 28th. And the order said, it is necessary on all accounts that you be with me by daybreak. There's no dispute Porter violated that order. He was ordered to march precisely at 1. He decided he would wait until 3. He was ordered to join Pope at daybreak. He was several hours late. Next, August 29th, the first day of the main battle of Second Manassas. Porter receives what is referred to as the joint order, so called because it was jointly addressed to Porter and McDowell. I won't read it, it's long, it's convoluted, it's contradictory, but in Pope's mind, it was an order that Porter attack Jackson's right flank that day. Pope's battle plan for August 29 was Pope would attack Jackson's center and Jackson's left, pinning Jackson in place, and Porter would jump on Jackson's right flank, roll it up, and voila, we have defeated the great Stonewall Jackson. All afternoon, Pope is waiting to hear sounds of battle from Porter's front on the left. Porter doesn't attack. So Pope issues another order. This is called the 430. This order is clear. It tells Porter to attack. It says, your line of march brings you in on Jackson's flank. Attack his flank, and if possible, his rear. In response to that order, Porter doesn't attack. So now Pope is angry and he issues a peremptory order. Upon receipt of this order, march with your whole command and join me on the battlefield. Porter disobeys that order too, to the extent that through some sloppy staff work, two of his brigades miss a turn and march completely off the battlefield, although one does come back. Now, a problem with these orders is that Pope, come back to that, General. Pope has a complete misunderstanding of the conditions on the battlefield. Pope thinks that that's what the battlefield looks like. And specifically, he thinks Jackson's line extends that way. He thinks Porter is here. And there's nothing stopping Porter from assaulting Jackson's flank. It's all very simple. Except this is the reality. Jackson's line is pulled back. Porter is way over here. And most significant of all, there's a gentleman named Longstreet in force confronting Porter. And that is the situation as of 12:30 on August 29. As I said, the flank assault by Longstreet doesn't come until the next day, but Longstreet's already there. But as I said, Pope has this view of reality and he is getting angry at Porter. Now, a lawyer will always want to know, particularly if you're a prosecutor, what's the motive? I need a motive. Why would Porter disobey these orders? Why would Porter fail to attack? And another element of the charges against him was misconduct in the face of the enemy. And that charge said, even without an order, General Porter, you should have attacked, even without an order, because you knew your commander was engaged in battle and needed help, and you didn't help. So again, what's the motive? Why would Porter fail to assist? Why would he fail to attack? Well, the prosecutor had a theory. Judge Advocate General Joseph Holt, another Stanton crony. Stanton actually got Holt this job. They had served together in the last months of the Buchanan administration. Holt had a theory. Holt had in his possession a series of telegrams that Porter had sent before the battle, and in those telegrams, Porter makes a lot of disparaging comments about Pope. He clearly despises him. He clearly thinks Pope is an idiot, and he's putting all this in writing. Worse, for Porter, Porter makes it very clear he does not want to serve under Pope. Instead, He wants to get back under the command of his buddy, McClellan. And in one of the telegrams, Porter writes, and he's writing these to Burnside, by the way. Porter writes, my birthday is coming up. Everybody say, aw. My birthday is coming up. My star always rises on my birthday. I hope that Max, McClellan's star, also is on the rise. That's very interesting phraseology. He's hoping Max star is on the rise. Hall's theory, based on the telegrams, is that the reason Porter disobeyed all these orders and the reason he didn't support Pope is because Porter wanted Pope to lose the battle. Because if Pope loses the battle, there's going to be a crisis. And in that crisis, it's more likely than not that Lincoln will be forced to return and rely on McClellan. And that's exactly what happened. Now, that's a very serious charge because that is treason. And that's why Porter's life was at stake in this proceeding. December 3. Okay, the charges have been read. How do you plead? Instead of responding, Porter's very good trial counsel make a motion to dismiss the court, claiming that the court was illegally constituted. Remember, Morris had that objection. The basis of the motion is that the Articles of War, which govern court-martials, mandate that whenever an army commander has preferred charges, the court-martial has to be appointed by order of the President of the United States. So this court has been appointed by order of General-in-Chief Henry Halleck. That's not good enough. Now, lest you think that this is some just delaying tactic, some technicality, some cheap lawyer's trick, not that I ever engaged in any of those in my practice. No, Porter's counsel had a strategy. A trial lawyer will tell you if you can show that a witness has an interest in the outcome of the case, a bias, it's easier to attack his credibility. Porter's counsel wanted to get it on the record that Pope was behind these charges. So then they'll argue, Pope doesn't really believe Porter did anything wrong. He's just looking for a scapegoat to save himself from the humiliating defeat. That's what they're trying to do. So, in response to the motion to dissolve the court, trying to get Pope on record as being the accuser, the following colloquy occurs. Pretty much like this. It's almost common. Porter's counsel. We wish to know if General Pope is bringing these charges. Halt. The order appointing this court-martial doesn't say who's bringing the charges. Porter's counsel. Yeah, we know that. But isn't General Pope behind the charges? Halt. The charges are signed by Benjamin Roberts. Porter's counsel. Yes, we know that. But Roberts is on Pope's staff. Isn't Pope simply using his staff member as an agent to bring the charges? Oh, certainly not. In fact, General Pope has never brought any charges against General Porter. Porter's counsel. Really? Here's an order from General Halleck of a couple of weeks ago referring to a court of inquiry. And the purpose of the court of inquiry, according to Halleck, is to examine charges brought against Major General Fitz John Porter by General John Pope. Pay no attention to that. That court was dissolved. That court never took any action, ignoring the issue. And true, yes, the court of inquiry was dissolved. It was renamed as a court-martial with exactly the same members, except Morris was booted in favor of Slough. Now, this is the first odd thing. During all this back and forth, nobody on the court speaks up. Nobody in the court of the 9 members say to Holt, come on, Judge. You're obviously bobbing and weaving. Just cut to the chase. Is Pope behind the charges directly or indirectly? Instead, the court decides we will retire to consider the issue. Holt joins them in private deliberations, as he would do for every time they went into private session to consider an issue. Now, I don't think that was considered unethical at the time because Holt was their legal advisor. But the fact is, they went into secret session quite a few times, and every time they came back, with one exception, every time they came back, they always ruled against Porter, and Holt was always in the room with them giving advice. And here they come out and they say, motion denied. Now, of course, Pope was behind the charges. It turned out later that he had bribed his staff member, Roberts, saying to Roberts, I'll get you a promotion if you put your name on the charges so I can keep my skirts clean. But by denying the motion, the court allows Pope to testify as a simple, objective truth teller, rather than someone looking for a scapegoat. Holt then calls Pope as his first witness, and the anomalies start to pile up during Pope's time on the witness stand. Pope's direct testimony was pretty straightforward. I issued these orders. Porter didn't obey them. Okay. But Pope was allowed to stray into beyond what I said, what I saw, into giving opinion testimony. Pope was allowed to opine that, if Porter had obeyed my orders, I would have won a great victory. He was also allowed to opine, the reason we lost is because Porter disobeyed my orders, and he put the safety of the Capitol at risk. That's his opinion. And he's allowed to do this. So he's doing a very good job of what he set out to do, which is to smear and place the blame on Porter. And there are newspaper reporters, by the way, in the courtroom taking all this down. Then Porter's counsel gets a crack at Pope on cross. Counsel starts by asking General Pope to confirm that shortly after the night march incident, Porter met with Pope and he explained why he, Porter, had modified his compliance with the order, and that Pope had said, your explanation makes sense. I am perfectly satisfied with the course you took. In response, Pope said, I don't recall any such meeting. Now, a lawyer will tell you that when a witness says, I don't recall something, that's not a denial. That's I don't recall whether or not it happened. Some witnesses use I don't recall when they don't want to come out right and lie and deny something happened. But as I've told witnesses in prep, if you say you don't recall something when in fact you do, that's a lie. But I think that psychologically, some people feel better when they lie, when they say, I don't recall. Also, it gives them an escape hatch if, say, a document pops up, which shows that something did or didn't happen. The witness can then say, oh, no, the document refreshes my recollection. Now I remember. Keep that principle in mind. Now here, when they push Pope, he does finally grudgingly concede, well, I might have had such a meeting with Porter, and I might have told him I was satisfied with how he followed that order. But then he adds quickly, but in my own mind, I wasn't satisfied. So why are you lying to Porter? Okay. Then Porter's counsel on cross goes for a bigger question, asking General Pope to confirm that shortly after the battle, in another meeting with Porter, Pope had said that he was perfectly satisfied with Porter's conduct during the battle, including specifically how Porter had carried out his orders. Now, to that, Pope said, oh, no, that never happened. Then Porter's counsel plays an ace. Well, don't you remember your own chief of staff, George Ruggles, once reminded you that you had such a conversation with Porter? Now Pope's in a bind. Oh, shucks. Ruggles is talking to the defense. So what's Pope going to do? Is he going to call his own chief of staff a liar? He starts pussyfooting around. Pope says, I don't recall Ruggles ever saying such a thing. Then I guess he felt that wasn't cutting it, and he says, I am very certain that Ruggles never said such a thing, but I'm not going to swear to it. I have no knowledge of it. He's all over the lot. His credibility is starting to go down the tubes, and he's opening up a huge hole in the government's case. Because if the commander of the Army of Virginia had told General Porter I have no problem with how you carried out my orders. Why is the government prosecuting Porter? Then Pope, who probably was getting a little flustered by the effective cross-examination, added, well, I did tell him, General Porter, that as matters then stood, I would not report his conduct to Washington. Now, that was a mistake, because Porter had good counsel, and the counsel pounced, asking, if, as you have said, you believe that the accused violated your orders, and that violation caused the loss of the battle, and that result placed the very safety of the capital at risk, why is it then that you told him that you would not report him to Washington? It's a very good question. Pope doesn't know what to say. If you read the transcript, he doesn't know. It's a trap. He doesn't know what to say. Instead, in what must have been an act of desperation, Pope, the witness, blurts out, the question is improper, I refuse to answer it. Well, wait a minute. The question obviously was proper. And not only was it clearly proper, Holt hadn't even objected. Holt knew it was a proper question. Second, witnesses don't get to decide when a question is proper. That's the province of the court. Somebody on the court should have said, General Pope, answer the question and don't tell us how to do our jobs. Instead, the court announces, we will retire to consider the issue. Well, wait a minute, what's there to consider? There's no objection. Nevertheless, they retire and they come back and they say, we have concluded the question is improper, and General Pope, we are directing you. You will not answer that question. Porter's counsel pops up with a already written protest with argument. And as I said, there are reporters. Reporters are seeing all this. Things are not going well for the government. And it's at this point that presiding judge Hunter says, you know, this would be a good time to adjourn for the day. The adjournment accomplishes two things. It gets Pope off the hot seat where he's not doing well, and it gives Pope overnight to think of a way out of his dilemma, which he does. And as it turns out, Holt met with him in the middle of his testimony, and they came up with a way out of the problem. So the next morning, Pope resumes the witness stand, and surprise, surprise, General Pope says, you know, I'd be happy to answer that question from yesterday now, and that puts the court in a bind. Court's already ruled emphatically it's an improper question. In fact, told him you were not to answer it. So now what are they going to do? Holt leads them into the back again, and the court comes out and effectively says, we'd love to hear your answer, General Pope. And then Pope launches into a long, clearly well-rehearsed speech. And among other things, among other things, he said, now I remember what we were meeting about. I had learned that General Porter had sent some letters and some telegrams in which he disparaged me, and I demanded an explanation. And when he gave the explanation, I said I was satisfied with that. And as far as not reporting him to Washington, I never said I wouldn't file a report as I have to, but I haven't brought any charges against him, which of course was a lie. Now, as an aside, the letter that Pope was referring to, contained that phrase. Talk about how to win friends and influence people. Porter had written a letter referring to Pope as an ass. And this guy is a nightmare. He puts things in writing. He wrote to a fellow named, I think, Joseph Kennedy, who he hardly knew. And Joseph Kennedy gets this letter, and he shows it to, I think, Seward. And Seward shows it to Abraham Lincoln. This is what General Porter is saying about General Pope. And guess who Lincoln was? If he were my client in this age of email, he would drive me crazy. So, what do you think of Pope's answer? It gets him off the hot seat. So, continues to get some good stuff out of it. including an admission by Pope that at the time he expressly ordered to attack Jackson's flank, he really didn't know what it was. He didn't even really know where Porter was. So Porter's counsel goes in for the kill again. And this General Pope. General Pope if General Porter were not where you thought he was, if he would have to march to reach, and if Longstreet were there in force in front of him, in other words, the real conditions. Any truthful answer to that question would have to be, well, if those were the conditions, of course I would have excused non-compliance, and then you fight about whether the excuse is not compliance. But before Pope can be that question, the court staffs again. Somebody on the court objected for an opinion. What? Please don't dummy, by the way. Holt hadn't objected because he knew it was a problem. It wasn't going for an opinion. Not to mention that when Pope testifying against Porter, he was allowed to give his opinion right away. But the court comes back from another recess and says, no, he's not to answer that question, calls for mere opinion, and just so there's no misunderstanding, we are not allowed to in this proceeding. So Pope finally gets to slither off the witness stand, helped by timely interventions by the court. Holt then calls First Lieutenant Drake McKay, who order a short testimony. Roberts,